Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider, and it is the Purple Insider Fantasy Show with Mike Schopp, WGR 550, and the Deep End Fantasy Football Podcast. And the show presented to you by our great friends at Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy sports and the fastest growing app in the industry. Remember to use that promo code PURPLE when you sign up at Underdog Fantasy to claim your special pick. First time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Must be 18 or older. Terms apply. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit ncpgambling.org. And we'll have our pick'ems for Thursday Night Football with the Vikings and Rams very soon. I almost called just to complain the other night, Mike, because I was so close on Ravens and Bucks. I nailed every one of them except for I needed Lamar to not throw at one of those massive long touchdowns. So we keep coming ever so close and we're not quite there yet, but an exciting time in the NFL. We got another trade to talk about, Mike.
We do. I mean, that's a guy that it never feels good betting against him, but I'm sort of tempted to do it again at Cleveland, and we'll maybe get to that game, but with the Browns losing Watson, which is probably a plus for them. I just want to say before we get rolling, so I'm here in my basement, Grand Island, New York. You and I met through your time in Buffalo, and I've got this mini helmet collection, and I change it up every week based on who's playing in the following week. So we've got Dallas, San Francisco, Giants, and Pittsburgh. They're like the mini helmets. It's not like these little guys, all right? Here's like a gumball machine. Well, that side doesn't have the logo on it anymore, but because we don't have a Viking Super Bowl, not to pick at scabs, but so I only have this size. But Vikings and Rams, I don't know about you. You and I think both like to watch old games from time to time, and I can think of two games between the Rams and the Vikings, and I'm sure there were like at least 10 more. But
okay, the one they played in the mud.
The one they played in the mud, 1977 divisional round. The Rams were 10-point favorites in the Coliseum against Minnesota. Minnesota won the game 14-7 with Bob Lee. So for the Rams to be 10-point favorites, they must have had like a much more impressive season, but they couldn't handle the mud. And then there was a game in the late, maybe 89, where it was 21-21 to overtime, and the Vikings won on a safety, which is pretty rare in NFL history. It was a block. Merriweather, I think, was the name. There was a block punt or something in overtime, and they won by 2 in overtime.
Okay, was this the game where Rich Karlis kicked like 7 field goals or something to add up to 21 points? Yeah,
that could be right. Yes.
The barefooted kicker, and I think he kicked a game-tying field goal to tie the NFL record, and then they won on the blocked punt in overtime because. Strangely enough, it wasn't that long ago that I watched actually an NFL Films feature on barefoot kickers, which no longer exist and have not existed in a very long time.
Yes, but we talked about that, and that's not coming back, right?
No, I don't think so, especially since kickers are absolute freaks. So the other day, Mike, Kevin O'Connell, if the Vikings had not gotten a 5-yard penalty for not lining up correctly, he said he was going to send out the kicker from 68. Like in the year 2043, do they just catch the extra point or the kickoff and have to decide whether to kick a field goal or not because guys are kicking it so far? Like, okay, do we actually try this drive or just kick a field goal from 75 yards? It's like the Sebastian Janikowski attempted 76-yard field goal, which was essentially a joke from Lane Kiffin. Maybe it'll go in soon. I don't know.
Is there a working theory on why? Like kickers aren't. Oh, I can't wait to hear it because I'm going to throw out a couple of stupid ones. So like, are kickers bigger? Maybe they're bigger. Like those guys in the barefoot. Okay. Those guys in the barefoot era were small. Like that's kind of why they were kickers. They were soccer players and they were just not like big bodies. So that's different now. I was looking up in Buffalo. There's some consternation about Tyler Bass, who had gotten into kind of by modern standards, sort of a rough patch. He went 6 for 6, including extra points on Sunday, and maybe it's fine now. But if you look up his statistics, he makes 85%, career, 85% of his field goals. What is that? Like 6 out of 7, almost. And like Steve Christie was this automatic replacement for Scott Norwood in the Super Bowl era for the Bills. And, this guy makes everything. And he's like 78. I mean, just the standard is so much higher now. You've got guys like, and you see the churn. I mean, the Niners lost their kicker to an injury. They brought in a guy he might have missed. They brought in a different guy. Green Bay with Narveson, he missed a few, brought in a different guy. Like, there is this churn in the league at that position. So I don't think the Bills would, just to finish that point, really expect to do better, just dabbling on waivers than Bass. But it just is a point about how hard it is to meet the modern standard, like you said.
Yeah, I shouldn't have reacted so quickly when you said, are they bigger? Because they're not bigger from when I was maybe 12, but they are bigger
from when I was maybe 12.
Right, then like 1983. Because
I was 12 in 1983.
Nailed it.
Nice.
Because Ryan Lindell was enormous, and he played a long time ago. So, and Janikowski, I mean, what a beast. So I think these guys have been big, and they've been hitting the weights for a long time, or bigger. But if you look at the Vikings kicker, I was walking behind the Vikings kicker and their fourth string tight end the other day, and I said, one of these gentlemen is one of the best football players in the world. He kind of looks like a guy who should give the players water when there's a timeout. But my theory here is that if you are a fifth grader who has any kicking talent at all as a kid, they will get you. And I did a story actually with Will Reichard and the trainer of his that he had since the time he was in sixth grade. So he was kind of a prodigy kid for kicking, and they got him into these camps, and it was just kicking training, endless kicking training. And it's become more scientific. It's become more biometric. And you think about our right-handed pitchers in Major League Baseball, are they larger? I don't think so, but they are throwing with the most efficiency possible in this world because they can biomechanically break down every single inch of how they're throwing it. Plus, there's kind of the theory there may have been in the 80s, 90s, hey, accuracy was king, but now power is king. Just like it is in a lot of sports, the three-pointer, the home run in golf. Yeah, it's a great example where when Tiger Woods hit the ball 300 yards, you were like, oh my gosh, 300. I hit 270 now. It's like the golf clubs are so much better, but we're also so much like technically better. I think that all of it kind of plays into it. They have K-balls. A lot of teams have domes. There's a lot of things that go into it. But my theory is the childhood to adult training for like 10 years, not just, hey, we found some soccer player in Europe. He's pretty good at kicking. You're in.
Always follow the money, right?
Yep.
Like I remember in that Tiger era, it was always, driving accuracy on TV. Like just this guy hits Ben Crenshaw hits all the fairways. And then Tiger, and he brought on a whole new generation of players. Yeah, we don't really care about the fairway. We're just going to hit farther and we're going to beat you. And the data supported it. So there's a little bit of data in it too. And, to your wonderful hypothesis about the year 2043, like data sort of, gives you the answer when it comes to down and distance stuff. And as this is key to know, I think, when you sort of like just sort of bank on that stuff, it is always moving. And right now, as field goals get, I guess the word has to be easier, from 55 to 65 yards, we're basing win probability, those sort of quote answers, on how it's been through history. And now it's very much different. So we could end up in a place in a few years, not even 2019, where we're like sort of changing that, you know what I mean? Like we're moving the goalpost is technically what we're doing here. And now a 60-yard field goal kind of makes sense, which can change. And this should continue what you're saying too, right? Because it's more and more money all the time, which could change, just kind of what teams do on earlier downs. I mean, that could be our future, which I think is terrible. I mean, we don't really want that future, right? We're going to make the goalposts. Sal Capaccio with WGR, we talked about this recently, and his idea is to raise the crossbar. This is the longest fantasy football podcast in history that's still been on kickers for almost 10 minutes. But
it's okay because the Vikings have the best kicker in the league. and Will Reichard. So if you're in a fantasy league that has a kicker and you pick Will Reichard, good for you. It also might change drafting kickers a little bit, because that's always been thought of as maybe not the best idea. But if there's kickers that are of a different type of level who you can kick from 60 every time. And I also notice it's not just that the NFL kickers are getting better, it's everybody. You watch a college game, that used to be the joke. Oh, here comes the kicker. Now the guy just makes it from 49 through the middle of the post, because they know Division I scholarship, that's NIL, you can be pretty lucrative, right? To make that money. So I think it's going to get better. There was one other thing I was thinking of. I know. The blocking. The NFL changed the rules. So now they do this thing where they push down the snapper and they jump over him. But you used to be able to just murder everyone in front of you on those kicks. And I think that the kickers had to shorten their run-ups, and they had to do it quicker. They couldn't get like the full swing because they were worried about it getting blocked. But now that the rules make it harder for teams to pressure the kicker, you kind of have all day back there. So maybe Jan Stenerud could have kicked it from 60 if they weren't able to pressure him at all. But back in the day, you could just clobber every single person there and try to block it. Hang on. Let me silence my phone real quick so I can tell you that Us Days at US Cellular is back again. Exclusive offers just for customers, just to say thanks. Right now, you'll get $1,200 off any phone plus $400 off any tablet. Amazing, right? But my family is so excited about their new devices, they keep texting me during the show. They're all about Us Days deals, like $1,200 off any phone, $400 off any tablet. Terms apply. Visit uscellular.com for details.
That's a great point. I've got this card collection sitting next to me every week, and I want to find a kicker, but most of my cards are old, and most of the kickers are also running backs.
Hey, Fred Cox back in the day made like 53%, and he was the GOAT when he retired.
Fred
the
Cox.
highest scored kicker. Yeah. Do you want to talk about this DeAndre Hopkins trade? Because I could talk all day about Will Reichard. I'm not kidding. From the time he arrived at TCO Performance Center, and I have the receipts, all the podcasts, I was losing my mind. I've just never seen anyone kick a football like this. We were in the practice facility one day, and we were watching him because if it's outside, we're kind of far away from him kicking, but inside, we're right there. He gets his half of the field. So we're right on the sideline, and he is cruising 55-yard kicks, 15 yards above the posts. And I'm just, what is going on here? So he's an alien. We all wanted that 68-yard kick because he might have made it.
You'll get it. There was a prop bet on Brandon Aubrey. Was it week 1 for Dallas against Cleveland, or week 2? They lost to New Orleans, I think, in week 2. One of these weeks, he might have hit 60 something in week 1. I mean, that was always like the white whale when you're watching the NFL is, can somebody break that Tom Dempsey, former Ram, record, 63 yards? And eventually that's happened now numerous times. But there was a prop bet on whether he would make a 70-yard field goal or break the record. And it was like minus 180 that he would. And it's not happened yet. But yeah, I mean, very interesting. I think Frank Corral and Fred Cox and Tom Dempsey in the mud. It's definitely a different game.
Very much. So DeAndre Hopkins plays for the Chiefs now. What do you think of that?
I mean, I feel like that's a perfect fit for them and for him. These receiver trades. I mean, we've had big receiver trades here in rapid succession with Devontae Adams and Amari Cooper last week, and now DeAndre Hopkins. In Buffalo on Sunday, CBS, their announcers noticed, which I think, qualifies as appreciated and impressive, that Hopkins not only wasn't on the field in sort of hurry up drives in the second half, one of the commentators noticed that he wasn't even following the drive. Like the receiver who's about to go in the game or might be about to go in the game is at the line of scrimmage, and he was way back the other way with his arms folded. And you're like, this is probably over. So Kansas City, They, of course, traded Tyreek Hill, and that's kind of been the story here the last couple of years, how they were able to win back-to-back championships without an obvious wide receiver one, somebody that everybody agrees is great. Kelsey, I know, changes that. It's not right to ignore him, but still, they did that. But they have made receiver trades. They tried it with Kadarius Toney. I don't know. That's over. He's I think maybe on the Cleveland practice squad. I don't even know at this point. And still young, talented, but didn't happen. And then last year, I think it was Hardman that wanted out from the Jets. Remember, there was like a text or something with Mahomes, like, get me out of here. And they do. And they win again. And doesn't he catch the touchdown pass to win the Super Bowl? And didn't Tony maybe do the same thing the year before? So now, I mean, this is a different deal, obviously, with DeAndre Hopkins. It's like Amari Cooper with the Browns, and maybe to an extent also Adams with the Raiders, where I think it's really hard to know, and it doesn't have to be black and white, but whether the guy is like really to blame for his lack of production. What is it? What's going on with the depth of target? What's going on with success rate? I think Watson was so bad, historically bad for Cleveland, that at the risk of being a homer here, I thought, like, Cooper, let's go. I mean, wheels up with this guy. Maybe he's not a perfect player and he's 30, but it's worth the effort. It's worth a third-round pick. I thought that was like a great idea. Appreciate the aggressiveness of it too. And this is easily at least that for Kansas City. I mean, they're trying to make history. We had Cooper Kupp on the table yesterday with the Rams, who we'll probably talk about here. And I know the Chiefs aren't a team that's sort of pushed in their chips, big contract and big commitment to receivers. They did the opposite with Tyreek, but they still made efforts. They still want to get there. They're losing guys every week to injuries. They're winning every game. I mean, you have to make a trade like this. And it's not even as rich of a draft pick as it was for Amari Cooper.
I don't even know what their situation is with the cap, but I feel like they could do another one. Like, they could even add another wide receiver. They're in a position where you should just burn third-round draft picks to bring in great players. And the same thing goes for Buffalo. Loved the trade for Buffalo. Having seen Cleveland up close in the joint practices and then watched a couple of their games, I don't think it was Amari Cooper's fault. Not even a little bit. I mean, Deshaun Watson was playing some of the worst football at quarterback that you're ever going to see for someone who gets to keep starting. Usually they bench a guy who plays like that. So I think Cooper showed that he's got it. With Hopkins, he has never had to win with speed. It's always been his technique. He's kind of Keenan Allen-ish. He has incredible hands. The Vikings have played against him a few times, and he catches just about everything. And also we should say too, that Rashee Rice was a wide receiver one at the end of last year. So they kind of did have that, even though that was talked about as if they didn't. But then losing him was a big factor. Is there something different to you about Mahomes, though? He keeps winning. It's entertaining every week. It's kind of wild every week. That play he made down the sideline and then crushing the guy in the end zone. He does cool stuff still, but it doesn't have the same feel as it did before. And I just don't really know what to make of it, because I will not be the one betting against Patrick Mahomes here.
Yeah. Well, my main guess is it's just finally gotten to a point where it all became untenable. Rice was a big investment, and you're right to point out how he progressed and how he mattered to their offense last year. They also signed Marquise Brown, who got hurt maybe on the first play of the preseason for the year. Like, so they showed their hand, like they wanted to change this. And then you lose Hollywood right away. You lose Rice early enough. And Kelsey he's different. I mean, out of maybe a little bit more necessity, they're like, okay, we can't just wait until January to throw the ball to him now because our other guys are gone. And they're really, I mean, to go to Juju, who was, kind of written off for dead in New England because of his knees, and like, this guy just can't play anymore. Here are the Patriots who just need anybody, and they can't even make that work, and they paid him. And then Kansas City, like, 7 for 130 and a touchdown immediately. And then he gets hurt. So with Mahomes, I mean, you got to believe it's still in there. And the drive of his drive, the team, all of it, I'm sure it's eyes on the prize for Kansas City one way or another. Look at their schedule now. So they go to Vegas, then it's Tampa and Denver at home. If that's 9-0, then they come here to Buffalo after that. And then it's Carolina after that and Vegas again. Like there's a pretty good chance they're like 13-1. And we won't know. We'll have the same conversation then as we're having now, even with DeAndre Hopkins, because a team like that, to get to fantasy, the fantasy numbers just don't materialize. Like that team, the defense is great. The schedule is the hard part of their schedule. They've beaten Baltimore. They've beaten Cincinnati. They've beaten San Francisco. Like that's kind of behind them now. And it could just be more of the same, even with Kareem Hunt nearly running for 3 touchdowns against the Niners, another guy who was not even in the league before Pacheco got hurt and Kansas City just reached out. So I think the most interesting conversation about the year Mahomes is having is around the MVP award and just like, what do you do with the guy that we all accept as great? There's sort of a legacy element to MVP, but he leads the league in interceptions. It's just like, there are no numbers here. How can he win? How can you vote for him? That's another one that's fun, but fantasy wise, you and I have been over this, starting Darnold over him, Geno Smith, guys, you just sort of like, you cringe a little bit when you do it, but it hasn't been wrong yet.
You know what it's reminding me of is when Tom Brady didn't have great wide receivers and he wouldn't put up huge stats, but they would play close games. Belichick's defense would win them. And then people on TV would debate, is Tom Brady really an elite quarterback? Should they just stick with Matt Castle as opposed to paying Brady? Because they won with Matt Castle. And then Randy Moss showed up and he threw 50 touchdowns or whatever. And I think there's a little bit of this going on with, if the Minnesota Vikings had as many injuries, if Jefferson and Addison and Naylor and Aaron Jones were all out, they would be 1-5. I mean, I think that he is grinding his way, finding a way, and some of the interceptions are kind of flinging the ball up and then it gets picked and it's not that bad of an interception. Their defense is fantastic. And I guess there's just a part of it with a quarterback that good who has all these accomplishments and only really cares about winning the game, that he's not trying to rack up stats. He's probably trying to just keep a hold of the ball with short passes, grind out first downs, give his defense a chance, and then say, all right, I'll try to win it at the end if I've got an opportunity there. But I don't think almost anybody else could do this. And I think that when over the years, the analytics people have loved to debate QB wins and things like that. And the one problem that they run into when they say QB wins aren't a stat, it doesn't matter, is the conundrum of the megastars, where you're like, I don't think Peyton Manning's team was good enough to win 14 games every year. I don't think that his roster was good enough or his coaches were good enough or anything else. I don't think Tom Brady's team or his coaches or cheating or whatever was ever good enough. And I think we're kind of going through this same thing with Mahomes. Like 1-score games are usually split. Tom Brady's record in 1-score games, 70% winner. It's like, I think that there are always exceptions to every sort of statistical rule. And we're seeing it a little bit with Patrick Mahomes. That said, I think he's going to throw the heck out of the football to DeAndre Hopkins. So if you got him or you could get him, then you should. I would put a big bet on him.
Oh yeah, that's right. Hopkins, I don't think, like, at least in most situations, quite sunk to the point of being a cut. But if he is, of course, like that's big. They play San Francisco and all their guys go down. They play without Ayuk and Samuel and McCaffrey. Like that's just, there's a lot of luck in the schedule too. So catching teams at the right time or the wrong time definitely plays in. I want to be like sort of the absolute toughest sell when it comes to these like baked in exceptions. Like, do there have to be exceptions? I mean, I need to see the whole case study to go there. I mean, still though, like anecdotally, at least, is Mahomes the exception? Do running backs matter? No, unless it's Derrick Henry. Like,
there's always exceptions, right?
There are. So, I mean, I don't want to say always, but there are. Yeah, like it just makes it so much fun to talk about. Fantasy wise, Hopkins, we'll see. It's going to be mostly short, I think. Rice without the big play. I don't even know if this has to be right. There's probably some still juice with DeAndre Hopkins, but like reliable, catches everything, like you said. And I think he's great for the Chiefs because they don't really have that. They don't really have anything right now except Kelsey, and that's just like sort of line of scrimmage kind of dump off stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's a win for Amari Cooper. It's a win for Hopkins. I guess it's a win for Adams, but that one is a little less obvious because of Garrett Wilson and just like the Jets' struggles. And Aaron Rodgers has all these injuries and he's 40 and he might be bad. That one is not, it's not Allen or Mahomes in their prime for sure.
Rodgers has not thrown for 300 yards since 2021. So I think just the typical quarterback gets old and continues to hang on thing is happening there. I am curious about your perspective about the Pittsburgh Steelers. So I think these things are always fun to watch play out on social media because Russell Wilson's first quarter, every single person is tweeting the same exact thing. Why did they bench Justin Fields? Which, by the way, for fantasy purposes, you're probably ticked if you have Justin Fields. But for anyone who's actually watched real football, it's Justin Fields. I mean, was it looking good to you guys? Like, I don't know. Anyway, so Wilson comes in. First quarter, he's not that good. Tomlin must be the biggest fool of all time. He just accidentally wins all these games. And then by the fourth quarter, Wilson has put up huge numbers. He's hit big shots to Pickens. And I did think, Mike, that in Denver, he had one of the worst offensive minds that still works in the league, Russell Wilson. And then Sean Payton wanting him to be Drew Brees, which he's not. Arthur Smith actually runs the Russell Wilson, Brian Schottenheimer, Pete Carroll run a bunch of times, play action, deep shot. I think that if you're George Pickens, you got to be through the roof. It looked like this could work without Russell Wilson having to be the old Russell Wilson.
The game for me was, yes, obviously it started kind of embarrassingly for all involved, but I think then it became the opposite, which is like, all right, what is he really doing? And Pickens really saved him. I mean, Pickens made a couple of plays, but yeah, that is Wilson's game. I don't know that every game is going to be like that, where I just don't feel like he's that good, but compared to Fields is a different thing, and that all of that is to say what about whether they should have done it. So far, they look great, and they probably won't look bad ever for making that move. They got through a good part of their season with Fields. I wonder what happens to him. He's one of these guys that really always needs to be clarified. Are we talking about fantasy football or the real thing? Because in fantasy, he was QB8 last year and nobody ever saw him throw, have a good passing game or whatever it was. So I don't know what happens to him if he gets another chance. Pickens is really the one, as we're talking about the other receivers, he's really the beneficiary for this, just like the Colts guys, when Richardson plays versus when Flacco plays, you can't play the Pittman Downs group if Richardson's a quarterback right now, but if he's not, then you absolutely want to. And I think Pickens was somebody that had become a tough start until this move, and that's really a great sign for them. Their schedule, they play the Giants on Monday night. After that, they get into the weeds with the Ravens twice and even the Browns defense. Like, they have a much tougher second half. Kansas City's in there too. So that'll be interesting to see. I don't think Wilson is a QB1 in fantasy at all. I mean, there's not much running. That's been gone for years too. And it's really just kind of these prayers to Pickens, which we know he can pull off, but I wouldn't want to start him over these other veterans I mentioned earlier. And certainly, the high end guys. I mean, he comes in, I don't do rankings, but maybe in the teens.
Yeah. I was thinking about it more from a Pickens perspective also, is just that he, with Fields in there, was getting so few targets that he didn't even feel like running his routes, which I do not advocate for. But in some ways, if you actually watch back a game on the coach's film and you watch how far these receivers run over and over and over and over, you could see why, if you're star wide receiver, you would be like, am I at a track meet here? Like, I am exhausted. I am, and the guy's never even seeing me out here because Fields can't see the field. from his perspective, I think they're going to really pump him the football. They know how good he is. And that might work for a lot of explosive plays. Just some other, before we get to Vikings and Rams, just some other random kind of thoughts that I've had fantasy wise. You having some regrets about not drafting Derrick Henry? This guy, it's almost like been off limits to talk about a running back as one of the greatest players of all time in this era. Like, don't even say it. Just don't even hint that a running back could actually be good or special. I watch Aaron Jones every week. I think he's pretty good and special. Derrick Henry is like Jim Brown is in the NFL. He just not, only if Jim Brown had played later. He just is unstoppable still. He's hitting 21 miles an hour still running down the sideline. Exceptions to the rule. I mean, I figured he would be good with Baltimore because they're running quarterback, and Gus Edwards was good with Baltimore. But this is all-timer type of stuff from Derrick Henry. And I just want us to appreciate it in a world where we've basically said, oh, running backs don't even come to the stadium. We're not going to discuss you at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I definitely have to take a massive L on Derrick Henry, like through the years. 4 or 5 years ago, I was off him, and that didn't feel good either. But you're trying to lean into process, like you bet against running backs as they get older. Is there a pass catching role? Does the team commit? Is the offense good enough? This was last couple of years, even with Tennessee, it really wasn't that great. I mean, the efficiency wasn't there, and you didn't have to have Derrick Henry to win anything, even though he looked, obviously this year you see him and he looks like at least the same player. So this year for me was more a structural thing where in the third round, I was usually sort of not drafting a running back, whether that was Henry or Travis Etienne or whoever, Achane, like guys. And you got to make sure you sort of talk about exceptions, take that into consideration. Like this one guy I had to have, but the other ones didn't hit either. And the receivers, look at the 1-2 turn in these drafts, all the injuries. That has just been wild and random and terrible for fantasy football this year. But what I've, learned in playing all these underdog best ball drafts is wide receiver is really where you want to load up, because the receivers in the back half of the draft are just not the same as the so-called handcuff running back who with one injury steps in and gives you Jordan Mason, gives you winning weeks. I mean, he's the NFL's leading rusher, or he was before last week. I mean, speaking of Henry. So that's why I don't have much Barkley. That's why I don't have much Henry, because these guys want one misstep with their age. The odds of an injury, you never know from injuries, but just like that probability, and then just how you build your team. And I know I was sort of tweaking you for your drafts because you kind of avoided rookies and you were into the veterans. And of course, every season is different. And right now, Henry is a league winner. One of my best teams. I have 5 or 6 teams that I think are really exciting, and he's on 3 of them. So never avoid anybody altogether if you're drafting a lot.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I just think it's kind of interesting that some guys who we were all afraid of because of their age and, hey, the history of these guys going to other teams, Eddie George as a Dallas Cowboy, just, lots of examples. Emmitt Smith is a Arizona Cardinal, doesn't always work out. And yet in this instance, it was a very unique, I don't think there's a lesson in the future, by the way. I really think that it was just this year. Henry, Barkley, Jones, these guys are special. They were the best players of the last 5 to 7 years at their positions, and they've still got it. But I wouldn't say, hey, go sign a bunch of veteran running backs next year, because that very well could blow up in your face. But it's just one of those kind of trends that I was curious about how this might play out, and has played out really, really well for somebody like Henry or Barkley. And then one more thing I want to throw at you. One of our friends who now works in the league, formerly of PFF, Eric Eager, back when he was allowed to be one of us podcasting, I used to listen to his shows a lot. And something he talked about was running backs, when they play with a running quarterback, average more yards per carry. And I think that might be something to look at in the future, because everyone has succeeded with Lamar. I mean, everyone can succeed, I think, in Philadelphia, where DeAndre Swift was pretty good, and they run with Jalen Hurts. I wonder if there's hidden value there if you can identify when a team has a running quarterback and the opponent has to have a guy at least pay attention to the running back on all plays.
Well, it's logical. I mean, maybe Brian Robinson in Washington is sort of an example of this, although Daniels missed most of last week, but he's been in the end zone a lot. I think you got to include Joe Mixon in this point too, by the way. Like, that's a later pick, and he's had huge games for Houston, a team that seems to really want to run the ball. And maybe after last week, you believe it because, or you can accept it because they didn't even get to 100 yards passing against the Packers. So, yeah, I mean, that's logical. There just always are exceptions is the theme of the show because it works both ways. Christian McCaffrey, quintessentially, was this. He was the first overall pick, and he hasn't played it down. Why? He got hurt? Is that because he's 29? I mean, who can tell? But it definitely happens to running backs. And it's also, just to say it, it's a little too soon for victory laps. Not that soon. It's not that early, but we still – the underdog betting world is about having – like a good enough team to get to the playoff weeks, and then that's where you win your money. And we know through history that older players wear down and the rookies get those late season opportunities. Maybe they're on a bad team. And I still want to think that not drafting so much of these running backs we're talking about isn't a fatal blow, because by the time we get to week 15, we're not technically even halfway there yet. There will be a lot more, if you will, carnage. And it's a terrible thing about this sport. And sometimes it makes you as a fantasy player just ask yourself all the questions about your life. You know, why am I doing this? These picks made so much sense, and now they're just out for the year. And, you know, is there a better way to live? But it's a long way. Yeah. It's a long way from the money weeks is all.
Chris Godwin would certainly make you feel that way, as great as he was playing this year. Let's talk about Vikings and Rams. I think that this is just my personal opinion, Mike. The Minnesota Vikings and their wide receivers should be very excited about this football contest. I don't see much in terms of secondary for the Rams. I see a lot of points against for the Rams, except for when they play the Vegas Raiders. I see a lot of short drives for the Rams, giving the ball back to the other team. This is a pretty significant mismatch, especially secondary versus wide receivers. And also, Justin Jefferson said yesterday, you know, it's been a while since I've had one of those 100-yard games. Would really like to get one of those. Wink, wink. I watched the tape of the Rams. I would really like to get 100 yards. I feel like they're going to throw all over this team.
Well, they might. The Rams are a tough one for me to figure out. Like, they're not dead at 2-4, and they're a team that they're famous for, like, not wanting draft picks, you know, relatively speaking. But yesterday we got that they're not taking calls on Cooper Kupp. They're making calls about Cooper Kupp. And like, okay, what is the vision here? Like, why would you do that if you were trying to compete in a division where San Francisco's down? That could be a really interesting thing. We have another veteran receiver getting traded to a team that has a chance to win. And I don't know, does he even play in this game then? If that's how the Rams are thinking, like just off a bad ankle, you know, sure, Minnesota. The problem, I mean, Jefferson is obviously great. And in fantasy, he hasn't been a bust or anything, but their defense is too good. Their team is too good. You know, the premise on the Vikings was that they'd be behind a lot. And that even with Darnold as opposed to McCarthy, whoever it is with Cousins, like, it didn't matter. Like, there would still Nick Mullins, that whole point. There would still be a lot of production in the passing game, but really they haven't been bad enough for that to manifest. Now you get Hawkinson back. So I'll defer to you on like how you think these guys are feeling about this game. Interesting for Darnold, like not a great day for him last week. And the premise on him has been he's had hot starts, but can he keep it up? And now in a national game, that'll be a conversation against a team that, like you said, it should be pretty beatable. They're only a 3-point favorite too. So you have everybody is back now in Minnesota. You have Addison not suspended or anything. You have Hawkinson back, right, in this game?
I think so. I think not officially, but I think so.
Yeah, and Jones is healthy. And, I mean, you want that, at least that one monster play, that 98-yard touchdown pass he had against the Niners, something like that, at least if, also as a fan, but as a fantasy player, where you can get Jefferson upwards of 20 points.
Yeah, I think what Jefferson's season kind of reminds me of a little bit of the one where Stephon Diggs then forced a trade. Not that Jefferson's going to do this, but where it's been a lot of big plays for him. And last week, I think Kevin O'Connell made a concerted effort to try to get him the football on shorter throws because it had just been explosives or nothing for him. And you need the football in the hands of Justin Jefferson. But the problem with Jordan Addison is it's also kind of similar where he should be running some underneath stuff, getting him going, and then try to hit the deep shot from time to time. But this is a more low volume type of offense where you're getting a lot of play actions and deep shots, and they are leaning on Aaron Jones a lot. But just as an offense, the crazy thing is they just haven't run a lot of plays. Like, when you're ahead by that much, I remember looking at this, the Vikings defense has been on the field for, in terms of plays per game, one of the highest in the league. And because they've been winning the whole time, and it's, well, we're up and we're going to play a little safer. And actually Kevin O'Connell's aggressiveness at times in those situations hasn't worked out for him. So it's 3 and outs or it's punting. And last week, I thought that Darnold overall played well, but it wasn't like a 340-yard type of a game that maybe we expected if you got a shootout like that. And it was the same sort of deal where it's a couple of short passes. Okay, here's a 51-yard throw to Jordan Addison. That's kind of the main way they're doing it. I don't know that there's a better way to play with Sam Darnold, though, because the guy's got an absolute cannon. But I don't think he's Kirk in terms of, I'm going to drop back and have 5 options on a play. I'm going to scan the defense, see one hole in the defense, pick it apart. And I am curious to see how it goes with Hawkinson if they lean into that a little bit more. The other thing is Jones is good. He averaged 6 yards a carry last week. I mean, he's just a great player. So they're giving him the ball as well. It's an interesting dynamic because I think that Jefferson does need a big game, though, here coming up at some point.
Would love to see it. The objective kind of faith or trust in Darnold is that he's going to throw the ball. Like he's going to play to his instincts. But he also gets himself into trouble, like the branch play where he's got Jones alone on the left and he throws to the right. Like that play kind of gets them beat. And so I think that's the player we have. And, fantasy wise, that can be fine. It has been fine. But as you get along in a season in the best division ever, really, the NFC North, I mean, when is there a division where the top 4 teams in the league in point differential are all in the same division?
Also, how mad are the Texans? They're just like, we're good. Why do we have to play these teams?
Right. NFC North, AFC South. Yeah. Very interesting game. The number was a little bit high on Jefferson. If it is a game for me in terms of underdog pick'em, if it is a game where the Rams just lie down and Kupp doesn't play because like the signal was sent yesterday, we are not going to win it this year. Maybe even Stafford. There's been some, I don't know if it's not baseless, but speculation about him being traded too. They could just get there in a snap. And if that happens sort of on the field tomorrow, it's going to be tough for the Viking pass catchers to really get there unless it happens early.
Yeah, the rumor stuff is always funny to me because knowing enough people who do this professionally, trade players and so forth, they have conversations all the time about, what do you think about this? Or this guy we might be willing to trade at the right price. And then the price comes back and okay, don't worry about it. And hey, we thought of this random thing. Nah, that doesn't make any sense. It's not very hard to text or call someone, but then sometimes people find out and then it seems like it was about to happen, even though it was never really real. And it it's a wild world we live in, but let's take a look at these pick'ems for this game. I am very curious with the skin in the game for myself because I will be there at SoFi Stadium to hear what you have for these pick'ems. And just a reminder, use that promo code PURPLE play along with us. You get the special pick, first time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. The pick'ems are super easy. I opened up the app, I clicked NFL, and they were all right there. And there's all sorts of different things that you could do with them. And we've been having a great time coming one short every single week, it feels like.
That happened to me again last week with Javonte Williams. I gave out a 4-player pick'em last week and got my 3 and walked quietly to the next hole, having nothing to show for it except whatever it is to tell you every week. We go back and forth, getting 3 out of 4, and you don't have to play 4. You can play more than 4 too. But they also, if you do a 4-player pick'em, they give you an option of a smaller payout if one of them misses. So if I had done that all season, I'd be way up. But this doesn't really seem. I'm here with you. We're doing it out loud. I don't want to. I don't like to live like that. I want 4. I want to lose.
Write it off like a business expense. You can write off some of the losses here. So
well,
what do you got for this one?
You want your picks to correlate. You want them to tell a particular story. You make your picks, and then what is the game you're imagining? And I've already said, I really find the wording of the Cup thing yesterday very curious. Like, why are they leaking that they're trying to trade him? Oh, and we'll keep money. Like, that's just so different from what it was with Adams, where, like Adam Schefter the day before the trade, I think it was like, oh, well, they would keep him, just come on. But this one, Diana Rossini was like, they're making calls. Wow. Well, he's coming off an injury. If you're getting those calls on Cooper Kupp, you want to see him play tomorrow? Like, no.
Right.
Just take your time, and we'll be better off. So therefore, I'm starting with him lower than 68.5 receiving yards. It's still a pretty good number. It's a pretty healthy number, but I don't know. I'm not even sure it counts in my favor if he doesn't play, but we'll see. Like, I'm just sort of predicting that he has a smaller game than the market. If they get really down, they do have a Kyren Williams is like automatic touchdown guy. Just, he is so important to McVay, to the Rams. They do have a second-day pick in Blake Corum at running back. Last week, the talk was that he would play some. He didn't really play that much. But in the game I'm sort of conjuring up, they get down, and it's not a 94.5 total yards night for Kyren Williams. So I'm going lower on him too. The touchdown pick'em on him is like less than 1x. He's minus 175 at the books.
Oh, wow.
To score a touchdown. I mean, that's kind of crazy. But again, my game is, it's quiet with the Rams. The one Rams higher for me is Tutu Atwell, 3.5 catches. He's nice. Like, he showed some versatility, little, fast. If they're down, he's a guy who stays in the game on the field. And I'm going higher than 3.5 catches for Atwell. And my one Vikings addition to this, I don't think you're allowed to do it just one team, is Addison higher.
Oh, yeah.
At 40.5, big play potential. And again, if this game happens, it would have to happen early, but Addison higher than 40.5. It all sounds like it could be, the Vikings night. Chance to really show everybody who maybe, most of the country hasn't really seen him yet, that what's happened so far this season is legit.
My random one, and you could say it's informed. You could say it's informed because it's this game, but it's not really. Just a little. Cam Akers to score a touchdown, I kind of like.
Revenge game.
And here's why. Because Kevin O'Connell absolutely cares about that stuff. He tried desperately to get Aaron Jones a touchdown against the Packers. Right. He made sure he left Aaron Jones senselessly in the football game in week 1 to try to get 100 yards, which just, what are you doing? And Cam Akers going back to LA. They got rid of him. Kevin O'Connell loves Cam Akers. Also, Ty Chandler was in the game for all of about 10 plays, made a big mistake on one of them with a holding penalty. I think they're kind of done with Ty Chandler, and that's why they traded for Cam Akers. somebody that Kevin O'Connell trusts. If they get the ball at the 3-yard line, I just think there's a decent possibility that Cam Akers comes in and scores. And this one is times 4.65 your money on this one. I would take my swing there for Cam Akers scoring a touchdown.
He's also perfect in the game I described.
Yes.
Like if they're up 28-6 in the third quarter, he gets 10 carries.
Right. Yep, exactly. And they will try to get him a touchdown if they are up 14 points or something like that. It should be fun. I will be flying out soon and can't wait to go there and watch this one and see how these pick'ems end up playing out. So always good stuff, Mike. It was fun to have a Thursday night game that we want to watch and that the team I'm covering is involved in. And next week, the Vikings have been flexed onto national TV. So we can have actually a really fun discussion about Anthony Richardson because that has been kind of weird. So I'm looking forward to that as well. So thank you as always for your time. I look forward to doing it again next week.
Have a great trip.